All the Young Dudes, Sirius's Perspective, by Rollercosterwords. Chapter 4, First Year, The First Disappearance. Dear Reg, hello from Hogwarts. It feels weird to be writing you a letter. Classes won't start till Monday, so we've all been given a few days for settling in. It's amazing here. You wouldn't believe the size of the place. And Bellatrix wasn't lying about those moving stairs. They actually do change around. They had to give us all maps so we wouldn't get lost. Have Mum or Dad said anything about... He scribbled that last bit out. Sirius Black was having the time of his life. He had never before been given free range to do anything he wanted with his time. No restrictions or rules or watchful parents. No scheduled lessons or social gatherings. Of course there were limits at Hogwarts. The professors kept an eye on the students, admonishing them to stay out of mischief, but they were certainly nothing like Sirius's parents. When Professor Flitwick caught him and James sticking dung bombs along the Slytherin corridor, he only confiscated the contraband and gave them a gentle, though stern, rebuke before sending them off with a twinkle in his eye. Sirius felt giddy with his newfound freedom. He spent his days running around the castle with James, exploring all the places he'd heard his cousins talk about. In the evenings they played games of chess or gobstones or exploding snap in the Gryffindor common room, chattering with their fellow students. And they talked. They talked about anything and everything. Sirius had never had a friend like James Potter, who would match his rapid-fire wit and discuss Quidditch for hours without getting bored. They could go on talking for ages, until it sometimes felt like they were in their own private world, somewhere that no one else could penetrate. Of course, this situation didn't always sit well with Peter. The boy acted as if he and James were attached at the hip, always following them around and trying to butt into their conversations. James liked him, so Sirius supposed there must be something more to Peter that he wasn't seeing, but bloody hell he was annoying. I've already made some friends. There are so many people here. I think James Potter and I are going to be best mates. He's the coolest. You'd like him. He told me he's got a Nimbus back home, the newest model, and once we're allowed to bring brooms into school, he's going to let me give it a go. I know Mum and Dad said to stay away from the Potters, but that's bollocks. Besides, they're purebloods too, so I don't really see why. He scribbled that last bit out too. Remus was the exact opposite. While Peter tagged along everywhere, involving himself in everything, Remus acted as if the three of them had some sort of contagious disease. He'd dart off with his map and his wand, disappearing into the castle without saying anything to the rest of them. At first, Sirius wondered if he had other friends, but every time he saw Remus, the boy was alone, and he still sat near them at dinner, though he stayed a few seats down and didn't speak to them. Whatever the reason, he made it very clear that he didn't intend to be their friend. My other dorm mates are all right too. One's a Pettigrew, Peter. He likes to whinge, and he's always following us around. But James says he's great once you get to know him, so I'm giving it a chance. The other's a half-blood. He told me that he was Muggle-born, but Peter says his dad was a wizard. Only he died when Remus was little, so I guess he grew up around Muggles. He seemed cool at first, but he's actually a bit of a prick. Too good to speak to us or something. And he just goes off by himself and avoids everyone. I suppose Mum and Dad will make a fuss about consorting with the impure, but it's not as if I get to choose my room. Again, it was scribbled out. They were all so used to Remus avoiding them that by the time Saturday night rolled around, none of them gave a second thought when he was absent from their room. Sirius had spent the day with James and Peter exploring the grounds, especially the Quidditch pitch, before heading back to their room. Sirius put on Abbey Road so that James and Peter could listen to it, insisting that he was about to change their lives. To his irritation, the other boys kept getting distracted. James kept asking questions about the words, and Peter wanted James to play chess, and both of them looked quite put out when Sirius told them to shut up and listen. Eventually, he gave up, trying not to show how upset he was in their disinterest. It just doesn't sound that different from other music to me. You uncultured swine! Sirius threw his pillow at James, who laughed and batted it away. The Beatles are gods among men. If Remus was here, he'd agree with me. Where is Remus? Peter piped up from the floor, where he was setting up the chessboard. It's almost curfew. They paused, looking at his empty bed, but none of them could answer. "How are things back home? Not too boring without me, I hope. Tell Creature I send my regards. Is he still sleeping in that awful nest in the kitchen cupboard? Anyway, I can't wait for you to get here next year. I'm not sure if you know already, but I actually got placed in Gryffindor, not Slytherin. I know Mum and Dad will have a cow, but I actually think Gryffindor's way cooler anyway. And it doesn't even bother me, so..." The pen dug into the paper as he scribbled it out. Curfew came and went, and Remus still didn't appear. Sirius kept glancing at his empty bed. He knew it was stupid, but he couldn't help wondering, was it their fault? It was quite clear that Remus disliked his roommates. Could he have asked to be transferred to another room? Was that even an option at Hogwarts? Could he have left school entirely? "Do you think we should ask someone?" Sirius suggested. It was getting late, and he couldn't shake the worries that crept like vines through the back of his mind. Outside, night had fallen. The moon was high in the sky. "Maybe," James shrugged. "I suppose it couldn't hurt to ask Frank. Don't want to get him in trouble, though, if he's just running late." Sirius frowned. Yeah, he does like to wander off, that one." He smiled uneasily, glancing at the floor. "How did Mum and Dad take the news? I mean, obviously I don't care what they think. It's not like they can get me kicked out of Hogwarts just for getting into the wrong house. But I'm just Eventually, they simply went to bed." Sirius couldn't shake his unease, but this was Hogwarts. If Remus was seriously in trouble, then surely the teachers would know. Still, he slept poorly, and when he woke up, Remus's bed was still empty. As he, James, and Peter got dressed, they resolved to ask Frank about it once they went down for breakfast. But just as they made the decision, the door to their room burst open. Remus barged in, moving stiffly. He looked haggard, as if he'd been up all night. His skin was sallow and pale, which only made the dark bags under his eyes stand out even more. "Where were you?" James asked, brow furrowed in confusion. "Nowhere," Remus said gruffly, pushing past them to collect his things. Sirius watched him in the mirror, where he had just finished getting ready. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," James said gently. "You look a bit weird." Remus scowled as if they'd yelled at him, muttering, "Piss off." Peter looked affronted, placing his hands on his hips. "We were just being nice," he said indignantly. Remus ignored him, going to remove his t-shirt, and stopping abruptly when he realized they were all staring at him. "What?" he growled at them. "You're going to watch me get dressed? You posh boys are a bunch of puffs." Then he marched into the bathroom with his clothes and slammed the door. Sirius frowned. If it wasn't clear that he hated them before, it certainly was now. Still, there was something about the way he'd moved, as if he were in pain. "I'm hungry," Peter whinged. "If we don't hurry up, we'll miss breakfast." Sirius cast a meaningful look towards James, who shrugged as if to say, "What else can we do?" The three of them headed downstairs, leaving Remus, as he liked to be, alone. "I miss you loads. I can't wait to see you at Christmas. And don't worry, I'll write to you every week. I bet it'll start to feel like you're here already. Your brother, Sirius." Chapter 5. First Year, Potions. Friday the 10th of September, 1971. By the end of his first week of lessons, Sirius had broken a window, lost his owl, and learned a new jinx, courtesy of his cousin, Narcissa. The lessons themselves were, for the most part, boring. They were all inductions, and most of them the professors only covered information that was already found in the set text. A few assigned homeworks, but it was all, for the most part, simple stuff that could be copied almost directly from their books. History of magic was the worst. Professor Bin spent the entire time droning on, practically reciting the induction from A History of Magic. Sirius felt like he was about to crawl up the walls by the time it ended. He'd already read the entire book over the summer. Transfiguration was slightly better, but still a bit of a letdown. It was the class Sirius has most been looking forward to, but Professor McGonagall said they wouldn't be doing any spell work for the first week, only reading, with homework assigned to gauge their ability level. Sirius liked reading, but he thought he'd come to Hogwarts to learn magic. In charms, they finally got to pick up their wands, but they were only levitating pine cones. Sirius was a bit surprised that one Muggle-born student, Lily, was the first to master the spell, lifting her pinecone 3 feet off the table. He followed soon after, though, adding a flourish to his wand work to set it spinning like a top, just to ensure he wasn't outdone. This backfired slightly when his pinecone spun so quickly that it sailed through the air and smashed a window, but James whooped with laughter, and Sirius smirked and shrugged as if he meant to do it. Neither Peter nor James, nor Remus, managed to levitate their pinecones, and Sirius was privately quite proud. The only other class that was slightly hands-on was potions, which Sirius was dismayed to find they had to share with the Slytherins. He'd been purposefully avoiding the Slytherin students, including his cousins, and his heartbeat sped up a bit every time he saw a flash of green in the halls. It was stupid, but he wasn't sure how to make it stop. To make matters worse, Professor Slughorn was an irritating, jovial man who insisted on adding a running commentary to his roll call. Of course he had something to say when Sirius's name popped up. "Black! Sirius! Aha! There you are! Quite surprised by the sorting, my boy. Quite surprised. I've had every one of the blacks in my house since I started teaching. I shan't take it personally, young Sirius, but I shall be expecting great things." Sirius could feel the eyes of his classmates on him as Slughorn announced how he had shamed his family in front of the entire room. If there had been any hope that some of the students might not know about how he'd broken the black tradition, it was gone now. 500 years, and you're the one to ruin it. Even Andromeda had been Slytherin. Slughorn continued to call out names as if he hadn't just said the most mortifying thing possible to all Sirius's classmates. "A Potter and a pedigree, eh? Well, well, along with Mr. Black here, this class has quite the pedigree, eh? Slimy old git," Sirius thought. Talking about everyone's pedigree. He was reminding Sirius uncomfortably of his parents at parties. "Let me see. Lupin! I knew your father. Not one of mine, but a damn good duelist. Nasty business." At this, Sirius blinked and turned to look at Remus, along with the rest of the class. Most of the year knew by now that his dad had been a wizard, but he was raised with muggles in a children's home. Sirius wasn't exactly sure about what that meant precisely, but Remus hadn't seemed inclined to share anything else about his past. A duelist. Remus's dad sounded quite cool, but what was Slughorn talking about with that nasty business? Sirius's mind buzzed with curiosity. Remus's eyes suddenly widened, as if surprised, but he had no other response to Slughorn's commentary. Once he was done talking about every student's family, Slughorn set them to work. "Best thing is to just get stuck in," he smiled. "Now, if we all work 4 to a cauldron, you can all take it in turns to follow the steps." James and Sirius rushed to the cauldron at the back of the room, Peter scurrying behind. Sirius looked up at Remus, but he just continued to stand rooted to the spot. Sirius had noticed that Remus had a tendency to furrow his brow slightly and poke his lower lip out a bit, so that it always looked like he was thinking hard about something. He had the same expression on his face now, as he watched his classmates pair off. "Mind if I join you, lads?" Sirius turned and cringed internally when he saw the Slytherin robes. The speaker was Nathaniel Quince, another one of James's neighbours. Of course, Potter was predictably welcoming, and they did need another partner. When Sirius looked back towards Remus, he joined up with Lily, the Muggle-born who had done well in charms, and they were working with 2 Slytherins, a greasy-haired boy named Severus Snape, who had a protruding nose and a dour look on his face, and a burly kid, Garrick Mulciber, whose name Sirius recognised as one of the families that often attended his parents' gatherings. Sirius looked back at his own group. They had James's book open, and they were studying instructions carefully. James quickly took charge, directing Peter to start crushing their thistles and telling Quince to measure out the snail eye stems. Sirius put himself in charge of stirring, listening as James read from the book and instructed him on how many times to stir and in which direction. For practical work, it was quite boring. Unlike charms, there were no immediate results, just tedious instructions and waiting for the potion to brew. Sirius could tell in the first 5 minutes that potions would not be his favourite class. "Let's try adding the powdered newt and see what happens," he said, elbowing James and wiggling his eyebrows. Peter frowned. "The ingredients don't call for powdered newt, though." Yeah, but wouldn't it be fun to see what happens? This made Peter frown more, and Sirius rolled his eyes in exasperation. James glanced between the two of them and said diplomatically, "Maybe we should save experimenting for after the first class, eh, Sirius? Wouldn't want to blow up the classroom on the first day." Sirius didn't have time to respond, because at that moment chaos broke out. A few tables in front of theirs, Remus threw himself at Severus, punching him square in the face. Sirius felt a thrill of adrenaline. Finally, some excitement. It was bloody cool, the way Remus clocked Snape. No hesitation, just a closed fist and a quick swing. He didn't have the upper hand for long, though. Multiple promptly yanked Remus off Snape, punching him square in the face. Sirius was about to get ready to jump into action, never mind that he had never thrown a punch in his life, when Slughorn bellowed, "Stop!" Everyone froze as the potion master hurried over, expression stormy. "Get up, both of you! Get up, both of you!" he shouted at the two boys sprawled across the floor. Snape and Remus obeyed, clambering up, both breathing hard. Sirius thought that Snape definitely looked worse off. His nose was bleeding, and his greasy hair was all mussed up. There was a bruise forming on Remus's chin, but it just made him look tough. "Explain yourselves!" Slughorn shouted. Both boys looked down at their feet, silent. Mulciber was grinning, and Lily was crying. Both were equally annoying. "Very well," the professor said, crossly. "Detention for both of you. 2 weeks. 10 points from Gryffindor, and 10 from Slytherin." "That's not fair," James said, suddenly next to Sirius. "It should be twice as many from Slytherin. It was 2 against 1. "From where I was standing, it was Mr. Lupin who started it," Slughorn replied curtly, shaking his head. "Still, you're quite right. Mulciber, 5 points for punching Remus. Violence does not solve violence, you know, and as I've told your eldest brother on a number of occasions. Miss Evans, please take Mr. Snape to the hospital wing. Lupin, can you clean up the mess you've made?" The lesson was almost over anyway. Slughorn had spent so long taking roll, so the other students were dismissed. Outside, the hall was abuzz with chatter. Mulciber wasted no time bragging to the Slytherins that flocked around him, saying, "Well, he's thick, innit? Couldn't even read the book. All Severus did was ask what they teach in Muggle schools." "Oi! And who taught you to be such a prick, Mulciber?" Sirius called out. "Maybe you can ask them to teach you how to throw a better punch. From where I was standing, it looked like your pal Severus was the only one bleeding." James and Peter laughed, some of the other Gryffindors joining in. Mulciber and his crew muttered angrily, but as they were still right outside the potions classroom, seemed to think better of retaliating. Sirius, James, and Peter watched them walk away, waiting for Remus to finish cleaning. When he walked out, he looked surprised to see them standing there. For a second his expression turned wary, but then James grinned at him, crowing, "Bloody brilliant, mate!" He punched Remus lightly on the arm, as if they were best chums. "The way you just went for him!" Mulciber was out here bragging afterwards. "Told everyone what Snape said," Sirius added. "You were right to do it. What a prat." "Told everyone," Remus groaned. "Don't worry. They're all on your side. Well, except the Slytherins." "Yeah, and who gives a toss about the Slytherins?" Sirius grinned. "Come on, it's dinner soon. Hungry?" "Starvin'," Remus said. For the first time since the train, he grinned back. Chapter 6. First Year. Revenge. Regulus didn't write him back. Sirius waited all week for a letter, but nothing came. Worse than that, his owl never returned. After a few days, he broke down and asked Narcissa, who smirked and told him that it had been confiscated. Sirius tried not to worry, but it felt like there was a stone in the pit of his stomach. More and more often he found his thoughts wandering back to Reg, wondering how his brother was doing. The solution, of course, was to keep his mind occupied at all times with other things. He made bets with James about who could finish their homework first. He played chess with Peter, over and over again, until he finally won. He watched Remus, who finally began to spend time with them, trying to puzzle out the odd boy's secrets. On Sunday evening, Sirius's distraction of choice was their transfiguration essay for McGonagall. 14 inches of parchment. James and Sirius raced to see who could finish theirs first, Sirius, while Peter tried desperately to keep up. Remus just relaxed into the plush armchairs of the Gryffindor common room, watching them all as though he couldn't be bothered with something as silly as homework. "So," James said, setting down his quill, "how are we going to get them back?" "Get who back?" Peter asked. "Get who back?" Peter asked. He was searching through his notes, looking for a page that he had accidentally elbowed onto the floor earlier without realizing. Sirius laughed and ducked under the table. "The Slytherins," James hissed. "Keep up, Pete." Peter whispered back, sounding worried. "Not all the Slytherins. Only Snape and Mulciber, right?" Under the table, Sirius rolled his eyes. "All of them," he said firmly, sitting back up and presenting the piece of parchment. "This is what you were looking for?" "Thanks!" Peter grabbed it, relieved. "I've nearly finished." "Have you done it, Lupin?" Sirius asked casually, looking over. Remus had his book open on the table, but he hadn't glanced at it once. In fact, over the course of the week, Sirius had noticed that Remus never seemed to look at his books. Everyone else seemed to have forgotten Mulciber's comment about reading, but Sirius hadn't. "Nah," Remus shrugged, nonchalant. "Can't be bothered." Sirius frowned. It couldn't be true, could it? "Let us know if you need help." "You can copy mine if you want," James said helpfully, pushing his essay across the desk. Sirius watched as Remus attempted to stifle his irritation, his jaw clenching, his brow furrowed slightly. "I'm fine. I'm not stupid." "No one said you were," James replied, acting as though he couldn't hear the bite in Remus's tone. Sirius continued to study Remus's expression. His entire face had grown colder. On the armrest of the chair, his fist was clenched. Sirius remembered how he had thrown himself across the potions table to punch Snape. When Sirius looked back up, their eyes met. Remus released a short breath, unclenching his fists, and said, "We could put itching powder in their beds." He seemed eager to change the subject. "Or on their clothes. If we could figure out who does the laundry, anyway." "Figure out who does the laundry?" Sirius blinked. But Remus didn't. Did Remus not know about house elves? Before he could ask, James responded, chewing on his quill thoughtfully as he said, "I like it." A pause, and then, "Anyone got any itching powder, though?" "Anyone got any itching powder, though?" All three of them shook their heads. "I could order some from Zonko's," Sirius suggested. "If you let me borrow your owl, James. Mum confiscated mine after the sorting." His heart sped up when he said it. He wasn't sure why it felt like he was admitting something. The whole school knew that he was the family disappointment by now. "I suppose," James replied. "Wish we could do it sooner, though. You know, strike while the iron is hot. Don't need to buy itching powder," Remus said suddenly, sitting up straighter in his chair. "Do you reckon they have rosehips in the greenhouse?" "Yep," Peter replied, still scribbling away at his parchment. "For healing potions. Arthritis, I think." "The airs make you itch really bad. Like, really, really bad," Remus explained, speaking faster. There was a spark of excitement in his eyes. "Matron, the woman who runs the children's home. She grows them, and if you get in trouble, she makes you seed them without gloves on." "That's awful," James frowned. "Good idea, though," Sirius grinned. "Next break, we'll go and get a load of them. Then we can seed them, with gloves on, and put them in the Slytherin bed sheets. Excellent." "How are we going to get into the Slytherin dorms?" Peter asked, finally setting down his quill. James leaned back, smirking. "Leave that one to me." They sent Peter to collect the rose hips, since he was the only one of them who hadn't done anything cool enough to get detention, which meant he wasn't on any professor's radar as a troublemaker. Sirius didn't have the most faith in Peter when it came to making mischief, but it turned out that he was actually decent at sneaking around. When he returned unnoticed from the greenhouse after morning break with a jar full of rosehip seeds, even Sirius clapped him on the back. After that, it was all a matter of seeding the buds. They locked themselves away in their shared bathroom, following Remus's instructions to wear heavy dragonhide gloves and avoid any direct contact with the seeds or the fine little hairs. Sirius sat next to James on the floor, working in tandem. "I can't wait to see the look on their faces," he said, grinning as he worked. James's head was bowed right next to his, and he looked up and grinned back, sharing the excitement. Sirius continued, saying, "I still don't know how we're going to get into the Slytherin dorms. Even Peter isn't that sneaky." He shot a meaningful look at James, who had refused, despite all Sirius's best efforts, to reveal his master plan of breaking into the Slytherin common room. "Let me worry about that," James said, and Sirius rolled his eyes in exasperation. Secrets were only fun when he was in on them. They sorted seeds and hairs in an extra jar, eating the leftover rose hips over the course of the week to ensure that they left no evidence behind. Their chance came on Tuesday evening. It was James who suggested that they could do it before everyone went to bed, and they split up to avoid suspicion. Sirius felt dizzy with excitement during dinner, rushing to finish his food. Remus was still helping himself to seconds, and Pete, although done, looked sick with nerves. So Sirius was the first to stand, strolling casually out of the hall. As he left, he thought to himself that if Peter ruined it for all of them by panicking and giving something away, Sirius would curse the boy himself. James was the next to leave, following at a discreet distance. They made their way into the girls' loo on the second floor. According to Remus, there was a secret passageway that led to the dungeons. Inside, Sirius could hear a girl crying in one of the stalls. Remus had warned them about that. Apparently nobody used this lavatory because of the gloomy ghost that haunted it. Sirius left her alone, pacing in front of the door as he waited for the others to arrive. "Well, someone's eager," James said, mildly, as he shut the door behind him. Sirius grinned. "Do you reckon we'll have to wait for Pete to hurl when he gets here? He was looking a bit peaky back there." "Nah, come on. Pete's a good sport," James smiled, but it was a bit strained. He didn't like it when Sirius made jabs at Peter. It always made things uncomfortable, so Sirius wasn't sure why he still did it. Sometimes the words just slipped out. He wasn't good at holding his tongue when he was annoyed, or excited, or angry, or, well, he wasn't very good at it ever, really. Once Peter and Remus had arrived, James made a grand sweeping gesture with his arm. "Lead the way then, Lupin." Sirius grabbed his arm, stopping him with a meaningful look. "Wait. Show us what you're planning first." James smirked that infuriatingly secretive, self-satisfied grin he'd been sporting ever since Sunday. "Oh, okay then. Here, hold this." He thrusted the jar of rose hips into Sirius's hand, pulling back his robes. Sirius almost gasped as James started to pull the shimmery, silvery material out into the open. His mouth dropped open. "No," he breathed. "You haven't. Potter, you bloody haven't." James was wearing a shit-eating grin, looking very pleased with himself. He winked at them all, and then, with a flourish, swept his cloak over his head so that it covered him top to toe. He vanished. "You jammy bastard! How come you never told me?" The excitement in his voice mostly covered the sting of indignation underlying the words. "You never told me either," Peter squeaked. "And I've known you forever. Where did you get it?" Sirius stifled the hot flash of annoyance at Peter's tone, which he was sure was directed at him. It did make him feel slightly better, though, that while James had kept secret from Peter for 11 years, he'd only kept it from Sirius a few weeks. "Been in the family for years," James said triumphantly, pulling the cloak down to reveal his head. "Dad let me bring it, as long as I don't tell Mum." "Lucky git," Sirius said, reaching out to rub some of the invisible material in his fingers. It felt silky, luxurious, yet as light as air. My parents would do anything for an invisibility cloak. I wish Reg was here to see this. "I reckon we can all fit under it," James demonstrated, pulling it apart and raising his arms like a bat. "Come on, let's all get nice and cozy." It was a bit awkward, shuffling underneath the cloak together, and they had to waddle around the room a few times just to make sure they could actually get about. Finally, trying not to giggle or whisper too much, the four invisible boys made their way down to the third stall on the left. Remus directed them, showing them which tiles to tap to open the floor and reveal the passageway. "How'd you find this, Remus?" James whispered. "It's genius." "You come out behind one of them rugs they got hanging on the walls in the dungeons," Remus replied. "I just looked behind it." "Do you mean a tapestry?" Peter asked. He could be so dense. Sirius had known upon first seeing him on the train that Remus came from a different background. The hand-me-down clothes, the shabby used books, the black eye. It became more apparent as he started to spend more time with them. Incidents like this, where Remus was slightly out of sync, missing words or unfamiliar with references the others made. Sirius wasn't sure how much of it was being raised with muggles, and how much of it was, well, being what the Black family would call lower class. Next to him, Remus stiffened at Peter's question, muttering, suppose so. Obviously, they all knew that Remus had meant a tapestry. Peter hadn't had to point it out like that. Just shut up, Pettigrew, Sirius huffed, kicking at Peter's ankles. Oi, Remus hissed, kicking back at Sirius with much more force. Bugger off. A sharp flash of pain shot up Sirius's leg as Remus's foot collided, and he yelped involuntarily. Sorry, meant to get Pete, not you. Be quiet, all of you, James snapped. We're almost there. They paused, listening through the tapestry for movement in the corridor. Once James gave the all clear, they clambered out into the stone hallway. The dungeons were cool, dimly lit and cavernous. Sirius felt a chill run up his spine. He tried to imagine coming down to these bleak corridors every night, living down here. He felt a rush of gratitude for the cozy Gryffindor common room. Where's the entrance? He muttered. Behind the wall, Remus answered immediately, pointing. The rest of them looked over. Sirius expected some kind of sign, a funny torch or a portrait, or even a stone that looked different from the rest. But it was just a plain wall, the same as all the others around them. How'd you know? There was a brief pause, then Remus said hurriedly, I've seen them go in it before. He sounded nervous, though Sirius wasn't sure why. Do you know the password? Nope. Damn. It's not curfew yet. Let's just wait. Sirius hated waiting. It was too cramped underneath the cloak and too hot. Peter kept shifting his weight from one foot to another nervously, and it was getting on Sirius's nerves. He was just about to snap at the smaller boy when 2 seventh years came hurrying through. Sirius jerked his head up at the sound of their footsteps and stifled a groan. Just my luck. Let's see the ring again, Bella, Narcissa pleaded with her sister. Sirius pressed himself back into the wall, wishing he was anywhere else. He'd hardly spoken to his cousin since the sorting. If their eyes met in the dining hall, the girls only glared at him. Bellatrix preened, extending her bony fingers to show off an enormous, ugly silver and emerald engagement ring, which she had been flashing about at every family gathering since the summer. At school, she'd been just as annoying, making sure that everyone knew she would be marrying Rodolphus Lestrange as soon as she completed her newts. Sirius had had to go to the engagement party. It was awful. Bellatrix was a bitch the entire night, and her fiancé was one of the creepiest men Sirius had ever met. He didn't even want to think about how soon he would have to attend their wedding. Narcissa squealed as she looked at the ring, as if she hadn't already seen it 1,000 times. Gorgeous, she gushed. Oh, I can't wait to get married. Wait your turn, Bellatrix replied, voice scratchy and haughty. Once Lucius has a better position in the ministry, I'm sure Mummy and Daddy will agree to the match. They were in front of the wall now. Bellatrix flipped her curly black hair over her shoulder. Sirius hated how similar it looked to his. Decades of marrying within the family had resulted in a complete lack of originality when it came to features. He cringed just thinking about the number of times people had mistaken his cousins for his sisters. Mundus sanguine, Bellatrix announced. The wall slid aside to let them in. The 4 boys hurried after, as fast as possible before it closed. Sirius's stomach did a flip as he looked at the place where he was supposed to have spent his 7 years at Hogwarts. It felt strangely familiar. He recognized so much of his family's stories. There was a fireplace, decorated with onyx and jade, the candelabras flickering on the walls, the portrait of Salazar Slytherin. There was a reading alcove his mother had spoken about, where she'd studied as a girl. His throat felt dry. He wasn't sure how to untangle the feeling in his chest. This place didn't feel like home, and yet it did. Sirius could picture himself here, or not himself as he was, precisely, but the son that his parents had expected him to be, chattering with his cousins, studying spellworks where his parents had studied, and their parents before them. James prodded them forward, and Sirius realized that he had frozen in place, completely unaware of the others around him. He hoped they hadn't noticed. They hurried up a flight of stairs, searching for the boys' dormitories. On their way they passed Severus, sitting alone in a corridor, hunched over his textbook. Sirius felt a spike of resentment that a slimy, disgusting little wretch like Severus had made it into Slytherin when he— Stop it, he thought fiercely to himself. You would have been miserable here. And it was true. But knowing that didn't really make him feel any better. On top of the stairs, they entered the first door, which was, miraculously, a bedroom. James cast off the cloak, rushing into the room as he said, "Keep a lookout, Petey?" Peter responded immediately, scurrying towards the entranceway and glancing nervously over his shoulder every 5 seconds. James, catching sight of the look on Sirius's face, nudged his shoulder and grinned mischievously. "Reckon one of these is Snape's bed." Sirius smirked, trying to shake off his dark mood. "This one might be," he responded. He pointed. "Sheets look greasy enough." All 4 of them snickered. "Quick then, lads. Gloves on," James whispered, unscrewing the jar. Remus and Sirius pulled on a dragon-hide glove each, grabbing handfuls of seeds and scattering them liberally underneath the bedclothes. "They'll see them," James said, sounding disappointed. Sirius frowned, looking down at the bright red seeds like spots of blood against the white sheets. Even in the dark, they stood out. "Well, they'll still get them on their hands trying to brush them out," Sirius offered. "Hang on," Remus mumbled, frowning and sticking his lip out the way he did when he was thinking. He pulled his wand out, biting his lip as he waved it delicately over the bed he had just covered in steeds. "Obfuscate," he whispered, enunciation perfect. The seeds disappeared completely. Sirius blinked, searching for any trace of them, but they were gone. "Blimey," James started. "How'd you do that? Flitwick hasn't taught us that charm yet, has he? Was it in the reading?" "Nah," Remus shrugged. "It's one of the 5th years doing it yesterday, on some sweets they bought in the village. It's not hard to copy." Easy for Remus to say. Sirius and James immediately attempted the spell themselves, over their respective seeds. Nothing happened. Sirius frowned, trying again, listening to James whisper next to him, "Obfuscate!" After his 3rd try, James had managed to vanish all of his. Sirius hadn't done anything at all. His face flushed with shame. "You better do it, Lupin, or we'll be here all night," James said good-naturedly. "Yes, please hurry up," Peter hissed from the doorway, white with fear. Sirius tried to tamp down the resentment bubbling in his chest. He gave a few more goes, determined to get it right, but no matter what he did, he couldn't replicate the motion Remus's wand made. He gave it a few more goes, determined to get it right, but no matter what he did, he couldn't replicate the motion Remus's wand made, or get the enunciation quite right. Finally he gave up, passing the task to Lupin. "You're going to show me exactly how to do that as soon as we get back onto neutral territory," he said. Remus nodded, looking a bit confused. He didn't seem to understand why they were struggling so much. Once every bed appeared empty, James announced, "Next room!" pulling them back into the entryway. "Do we have to?" Peter whined, hopping from foot to foot. "Isn't that enough?" "Not even close," Sirius laughed, a bit patronizingly. "What if we haven't even got Snape's bed yet? We have to get them all, Pete. Are you with us or not?" "All the boys, anyway," James said as he entered the next bedroom. "I don't fancy our chances getting into the girls. Remember what happened to Derek Creswell last week?" They made quick work of it, James and Sirius scattering seeds while Remus cast the concealment charms. Surprisingly, they actually managed to get every single boys' room, including the last one, which had 3 sleeping students in it, 6th years. Even Sirius had been ready to throw the towel at that point, but Remus had darted in by himself and returned a few moments later, eyes shining with mischief. By the time they had finished, it was getting late. More and more Slytherins were heading upstairs for bed, and they had to creep carefully down the stairs, flattening themselves against the wall as students passed. It was slow going, but they managed to sneak all the way back through the common room unseen, darting back into the corridor outside. Per James's instructions, they all kept as quiet as possible until they were within spitting distance of the Gryffindor tower, when it was finally safe to remove the cloak once more. "Window shins!" they all chanted together, as the fat lady swung open for them. Inside, the Gryffindor common room was warm and cozy, and Sirius felt a strange calmness settle in his chest. This was home. He threw himself onto the nearest available sofa with his friends, cheeks aching from smiling so hard. Frank Longbottom called them from his desk, where he was tidying his revision notes. "Cutting it fine, lads? Been somewhere interesting?" Peter's eyes widened for a moment with panic, but James waved his hand and said, "Library, obviously." Frank shook his head, though he was smiling. "I'm sure I'll hear about it soon enough." "I wish we could be there when it all kicks off," Sirius whispered, giddy with adrenaline. "And I wish even more that we could have got my cousins." "It's just the beginning, serious mate," James replied, slapping his knee. "Between the four of us, I reckon we could go even bigger next time." "Excellent first mission, men," Peter whimpered. "First mission?"